Hello, welcome teachers. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Thursday. I'm Kati Casto. I'm the English Language Specialist here collaborating with the RELO Andes office and the U.S. Department of State. I'm so proud to be here with you today for our RELO Andes webinar this month. This webinar is all about backwards planning. We're going to get into some of the basics of this planning method. So thanks for being here. I'm going to keep an eye on the comment box, and I'd invite you to share with us where you're joining from. Where in the world are you? Our RELO Andes webinars happen on the third Thursday of each month. So make sure that you follow on Facebook and keep an eye out for what's coming up every month. The RELO Andes Facebook page has lots of other really great resources that come up. So it's a great space to engage as English teachers. So welcome. Where are you joining from? Use the chat box or the comments to introduce yourself if you're able. Love to see you all joining live. Hello, welcome from Morocco. Hello. Give everyone a minute to get into the space. Welcome, teachers. Hello. Hello from Cusco. Thanks. Welcome. Happy Thursday. I know sometimes we have teachers joining from all over the world where you're joining late at night or early in the morning. Hello from Venezuela. Welcome. Well, let's get into it. Feel free to continue to introduce yourself in the comments, share where you're joining from. Our goal for this webinar today, I'm going to share with you a new, potentially new, if you haven't heard of this before, but a possible lesson planning strategy for you. And we're going to explore it a little bit. I'll give you the basics, and hopefully it encourages you to continue your exploration, your research on your own about lesson planning strategies. Hello from Lima. So this is our goal for today. I'll introduce it for you, give you kind of the basics, and then hopefully you can join me tomorrow for the post-webinar discussion where we can dig in deeper to this lesson planning strategy together. So before we get started, I wonder if you'll jump in the comments with an answer to one or more of these questions. I wonder, what are your current lesson planning habits? So as a teacher, what do you do with lesson planning currently? Do you plan every day? Do you plan weekly? Do you plan by the unit or by the class? What are your habits currently? I know for me, when I very first started teaching, when I was a new teacher, I was a frantic planner. I planned every day, sometimes up to the minute before a class, I was still planning. As I got some more experience and kind of found my footing as a new teacher, I started planning weekly. So I would spend time on Sunday nights before the week to plan for the week. And then I would adjust my plans throughout the week. And as I grew as a teacher, I would plan further and further in advance. It helped me to organize myself that way. Oh, I see your comments coming in. By the unit, you plan by the unit. It's helpful to plan in chunks as teachers, not only because it takes some of the pressure off us every night. We need to have some work-life balance, right? But it also helps us to look at the big picture of our big goals for students, what we want them to achieve, not just every day in each lesson, but over the long term. So feel free to share also, how often do you adjust your future plans based on data? I see you plan for the trimester so you can be aware of any adjustments. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Plan before every class, monthly planning. I see some answers in the comments box. Thanks for sharing. For me, I try to adjust my future plans based on what happens in my class. So I collect data that's formal and also informal, and then adjust future plans based on how my students are doing that data that I'm collecting throughout each lesson. And then maybe share with me, how detailed are your plans? When I was first studying to be a teacher, I wrote big, long lesson plans that were very detailed. Oh, I see. I review my classes almost all the time according to students' needs. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's important to be responsive to our students' needs in our lesson plans. As teachers, we are reflective practitioners. We reflect on our practice in order to do better in the future, right? To do better by our students. So, by taking some time to reflect on our current lesson planning habits, we can then see where we might have some areas of improvement. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, not so detailed after 15 years of experience. That was true for me too. As time went on and I gained more experience as a teacher, I didn't need as detailed of lesson plans as I did when I very first started. So I'm going to share with you in this webinar one potential lesson planning method or theory, but I want to acknowledge that there are many different lesson planning strategies. There are lots of strategies out there. There's research and textbooks and all sorts of ways to engage with lesson planning. The one I'll share today is just one of those many. So it's not the best one or the only one by any means, but it's something that I think may be helpful for teachers who are looking to move to a bigger picture of how they're lesson planning for the year or the unit. This theory is derived from the book Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTeague. And you'll notice that there's a UBD abbreviation here for Understanding by Design. Understanding by Design shows up in a lot of research around education and reflects this idea of backwards planning. So, what I'm sharing with you is derived from this book, Understanding by Design. Here's a quote straight from Grant Wiggins about Understanding by Design, UBD. It says, UBD was developed in part to overcome a bad habit in lesson planning. That bad habit is losing sight of long term aims and focusing only on a plan for each day or at most a week. So, the researchers of Understanding by Design viewed those short term plans, planning just for today or for tomorrow, as a bad habit in lesson planning because it loses our sight of the long term goals for our students. So, the theory of backwards planning starts us thinking about those big goals. I'm going to share some big ideas about this lesson planning strategy with you to get us started. Daily lessons in this method are planned backwards, starting with the big goals. That's the big idea of backwards planning. We start with the big goals and then we plan backwards towards the daily lessons. This requires us to take a look at our whole unit or year of study Sometimes that means mapping out the calendar, thinking about the time that we have with students, whether that's a semester or a year, and looking at the big goals we have for them for that entire contact time, that entire class. Lessons that are developed this way, starting with the big picture and moving backwards, are more likely to provide engaging, coherent, and helpful scaffolding toward a significant learning target. So, the way I think about this is if I start with the end goal in mind, that's my specific learning target, I'm more likely to stay focused on that learning target with every lesson that I have, every time I meet with my students. If I start the unit or the class without an idea of my big goal or my significant learning target at the end of the class in mind, then it's more likely that my individual lessons are less focused on that goal. I might have a lesson that's focused here and another one here and another one there or another one there. The idea with backwards planning is that we start with that significant learning target, the big goal in mind, and we focus all our lessons on that big goal. Our failure to plan lessons backward increases the likelihood that lessons will consist of directionless activities without a clear and unifying end in mind. So that's what I mean by our individual lessons without the big goal sometimes can be more directionless. They're not aligned to our big goal for our students. So the big idea of backwards planning can be looked at in these 3 steps. This is how we backwards plan. UBD calls these the stages. So the first stage you'll notice says identify the desired results. These are the big ideas and skills, the big goal for what we want students to achieve. And this is different for each of your classes or each of your groups of students. So when you go into a new class or unit with students, you identify that big goal. What do I want my students to learn from this class? Once I'm clear about my desired results, what I want students to learn and leave the class with, then we move to stage 2, which is determining acceptable evidence. This usually means a culminating assessment or a task. So, how will students prove to me and to their peers and to themselves that they understood those big goals and that they've made it to the desired results? For some people, this looks like an end of unit exam. For others, it might be a project based exam that happens to culminate all the information at the end of a course. The acceptable evidence is up to you, but it should be aligned to that big goal in stage 1, the desired results in stage 1. Okay, so after we figured out the big goal, and we've decided how we're going to test our students, what kind of evidence they'll show us that they've reached the goal. The third stage is to plan learning experiences and instruction. That's where you plan individual lesson plans. The individual lesson plans, you notice, come in stage 3 of this method, not in stage 1. That's why we call this backwards planning, because for many teachers, we start with planning those lessons, with planning the learning experiences. But this theory asks us to start with the bigger picture first, to start with the end goal in mind, think about that acceptable evidence or assessment, and then start planning lessons that align to the big goals. So I'll get into each of these stages a little bit, starting with stage 1, so identifying the desired results. And I put this picture of this teacher with a telescope looking ahead, because the first stage is to look ahead at the whole picture of your class or your unit. Here are some questions that I ask myself when I'm in this stage of planning. I ask myself, what should students know? What should they understand? And what should students be able to do by the time they leave my class? I get really clear about those big goals for my students, what I want them to know, understand, and be able to do by the end of the class. Another question I ask myself as I'm looking ahead to the end goal is, what is that end goal? These two questions are defining questions for lesson planning with this method. They help us to look ahead to the end of the unit or the class and figure out what exactly we want our students to leave with or to achieve. What's our big goal for students? Now, as I mentioned, this big goal will depend on your class. It won't be the same for every class that you teach. Imagine you're teaching brand newcomers, level 1. The end goal for your level 1 students will be different than the end goal for your level 5 students, right? So you're planning for each group of students that you're teaching, regardless of their current level, right? We want to differentiate our end goal for each group of students. Okay, so once we have identified our big goal, then as I mentioned, we move to stage 2, determining the acceptable evidence. There's 2 questions that I ask myself when I'm in this stage. The first one is, how will we know if students have achieved the desired results? How will I know if students achieve the big goal that I set in stage 1? How are they going to prove their knowledge? In what form? The second question I ask is, how will we evaluate student performance? As I mentioned, this might look like an assessment. It might look like a project. It might look like a presentation. Usually it's something that a student produces to show that they have achieved that big goal. Now, once we've figured out our evidence for the big goal, then we get to our lesson plan, stage 3. This is where, whether you are a brand new teacher and your lesson plans are very detailed, or you've been teaching for 15 years and your lesson plans are a bit more succinct, your lesson plans will come here in this stage 3. So the 2 questions that I ask myself when I get to this stage are, how will I support my learners? And what activities and resources will help us accomplish the goals? So this is where I really rely on the resources that I have. Maybe that's a textbook or a curriculum. I also plan the individual activities to get us to the goal. So I noticed someone put testing in the comment box. If the end goal is a test, I want to have lessons that prepare students for that test. Or if the end goal is a presentation or a project, I want learning experiences that prepare students to be successful. I also, in this stage, want to plan to support those learners. So what kind of differentiation or scaffolding or other supports can I put in place throughout everyday lessons that help my learners to achieve the big goal? Okay, so those are the 3 stages of backwards planning. First, looking at the big picture, then determining the acceptable evidence or the assessment, and then finally planning your individual lessons to reach that big goal from stage 1. So with this in mind, I'll put back up these 3 steps. What questions are coming up for you as you're thinking about this method of lesson planning? Feel free to drop some questions in the comments box. The first time I heard about backwards planning, I thought, whoa, how am I going to do this backwards? I need to start with tomorrow's lesson. But once I changed my thinking towards having an end goal in mind, a focus for all my lessons, planning backwards really helped me as a teacher to have a very clear vision for what I wanted students to achieve. So that's the purpose for me for backwards planning, having clear focus and vision. So thinking about this method, what are some action steps that you might take to improve your lesson planning habits? So I noticed some people in the comments box when we first started said, I lesson plan by the day right now. Today I'm planning for tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll plan for Monday. What are some things you might do to change your habits so that you can plan further ahead and with a more focused goal in mind? Share your ideas in the comments if you will. For me, in changing my lesson planning habits, it started with reflecting on what was working for me and what wasn't working for me. When I was planning one day to the next day to the next, I didn't have a good sense of balance in my life as a teacher. That was not working for me. I would stay up late into the night planning lessons for the next day, and then I'd wake up early. And even then, I felt like my lessons weren't as well prepared as I wanted them to be. So I had to take some action steps towards planning ahead, starting with writing a big goal for my students so I had some clarity about what I was aiming for. Another thing I see teachers do with their lesson planning habits is collaborate with their colleagues. If you have colleagues, other teachers in your school or in your system who also plan lessons, you might consider reaching out to them and planning some lessons, units, years together. It provides some accountability as you're planning your lessons and could be a way for you to improve your lesson planning habits. Collaboration with other teachers is always really valuable for us in our practice as teachers, but also in our sense of self and well-being to be in community and relationship with others. Okay, well, there's a lot of ideas for you about lesson planning habits. I hope that you start thinking about your big goals, planning ahead for those big goals, considering the evidence, the assessments that you'll have students prove that they've achieved those goals before writing your individual lesson plans. And if you want to talk with me more specifically about this, tomorrow, Friday, the 16th, at 2 p.m. Lima time, I'll be hosting the post-webinar discussion where we can talk together about lesson planning and our lesson planning habits, and we can dive deeper into backwards planning there. So I hope that works for you tomorrow, and I'll see you there. And if not, at least next month, on Thursday, October 20th, we will have another RELO webinar here for you. I will be here. Looking forward to seeing you then. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining live. And if you're watching the replay, feel free to jump into the comments as well. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.